Next, from Springfield, Senator Mike Hastings holds a press conference to give an update on the breach of the Illinois State Board of Elections. This runs about 15 minutes.
Just some brief remarks. We had a hearing today, a Senate subcommittee hearing on cybersecurity, and the topic of today's meeting was the hacking of our State Board of Elections in the last presidential election cycle. A few things just in terms of facts for those at home. It was reported that 200,000 names were hacked from the Illinois State Board of Elections website. In essence, it was 70,000 names. We had asked a series of questions to the State Board of Elections in terms of whether or not there was any patterns or surnames or geographic regions in terms which had a concentrated amount of names that were hacked. We actually found that there was a considerable amount of names from Galesburg, Illinois. So the Russians are hacking Galesburg or looking at Galesburg really closely. So whatever they're doing in Galesburg, you guys better watch out. But this is very, very serious because on the national level, we saw efforts to foreign agencies and foreign countries to penetrate voter registration databases and State Board of Elections. We saw it in Europe. We saw it across in different elections, to include France and Denmark. But in terms of Illinois, we learned that 7 IP addresses were used. 7 IP addresses were used that were linked back to the Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands IP addresses are associated with 2 servers, and bear with me now on the names of these servers. They're called Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear. Quite original name for hackers, but obviously they're very innovative. They're 2 of the largest hacking groups in Russia. These same groups are rumored to be tied to the FSB, otherwise known as the Russian Federal Security Services. They're responsible for the hack of DNC servers in 2016, and they're being run by King servers out of Russia. After hearing the State Board of Elections testimony today, these hackers were able to gain entry through the voter registration database. So where you enter your driver's license number, there was a failure to put a backstop on how much information you can actually put into that queue box where you put your information. That allowed for these hackers to send multiple packets to start phishing for information. Very, very serious. The other thing that we talked about today was who actually internally through our state electoral colleges or electoral systems have access to the State Board of Elections. And this is where it's the most serious. As the local election authorities update their election information, it updates the State Board of Election. That's very serious because it allows these very, very sophisticated hackers to access local municipality election systems through the State Board of Election. The State Board of Elections has acknowledged that. They acknowledged the fact that they had contacted the Illinois State Police and other entities, but my greatest concern is that local elected officials, I'm sorry, it's a very tongue-twisting word, local elected officials and electoral boards really need to start scraping their systems because there could be infected malware or software that lurks inside their systems. So what we're going to do out of this hearing is we've analyzed a few things. Number one is our office is going to send a letter to every elected office that manages elections. We're going to do that. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to file a resolution to encourage the State Board of Elections for them to go ahead and scrape and look at these local databases to make sure that none of these sophisticated foreign hackers are just sitting there. My gravest concern is this, is that we need to make sure that these attacks don't happen again. My view on this attack is that they're phishing for information in preparation for a future attack. Our democracy is so sacred that I was willing to die for it when I served in the military, and I know a lot of other people are willing to die for it as well. People should feel safe. People should feel that their elections are fair and that they're run appropriately. And that's part of the reason why I had that hearing. I think the answers we got from the State Board of Elections were very forthright. They were very honest. I think in some situations they went a little bit further than they should have in terms of some of the safeguards they got, and I had asked them, don't give away the keys to the house. So I think this is very important. This is a bipartisan issue. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're a Democrat. This is about you going to the ballot box and saying, I feel safe. The vote I cast is for one person, and you don't feel as if it's going to be changed at the last minute. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
So you're a Democrat. Your party has, pushed for more, for an easier time for people to register for voting on, bills and in many ways. Does it give you pause at all to, see that Illinois' voter registration had been hacked in that way?
The State Board of Elections stated today that they're being pinged every day by somebody. State agencies are being pinged every day by somebody. All of our federal agencies, I know for a fact, are being pinged every day by somebody. This is just the world in which we live. And I think that people should have that access to cast their vote, but we should also, as a state, protect these systems. We have the capability of doing it. And I think that some of the safeguards they took place and they stated today in their briefing, I thought it was, I'm reassured, but you can never be too reassured. You always have to be auditing your systems. You always got to be checking your systems. And you report on it, of all these data breaches. And, it's important that you're protected because some of that information out there, you don't want getting out there.
Did anyone from the BOE say anything other than just the names that were hacked, but like information-wise, what they fully got, these hackers?
Yes, they gave pretty good testimony in terms of that. You can look at the transcripts, but name, address, letters were sent out to those voters. 3,000 to 4,000 came back unreturned. That's something I want to get a little bit more of a handle on, is in terms of those that were unreturned. Is it because they don't live there anymore, or maybe they don't have the right information in there? I think that you really got to make sure that people feel protected. And the State Board of Elections sending a letter out, they sent it out 2 or 3 times, I believe, but we need to reassure people that their information is protected. I know some of the responses they got back from voters wasn't too pleasant, but then again, naturally, if your information was compromised, I wouldn't be too happy either. So.
Go ahead.
Speaking of responses from voters,
Yeah.
how do you think, or what would you like to tell voters in terms of how they should feel going into 2018, 2020?
Be vigilant about your information. If you feel as if your information's been compromised through data identity theft or whatnot, report it. Make sure you report it. If you see something, say something. That's my line I say back home. I want people back home because of this hearing to know that in Illinois, there's people like me that have a grave concern about this and are actually going to do something about it. We filed a legislation this session that said if there's been a data breach over 50 names, you have to report that to the subcommittee on cybersecurity. This is the first time in Illinois we've ever had in the Senate a subcommittee on cybersecurity. That's how important it is moving forward. And I think there's going to be a lot of technology bills, a lot of laws coming forward in the next decade, 2 decades that will have to address some of these issues.
Cybersecurity isn't new, but the last election, with Russian hacking and all this stuff coming up, and it seemed like the IT folks in the Board of Elections, they weren't necessarily focused on where the hack was coming from, but what the action was, and it was just, to them it kind of seemed like it was sort of, typical phishing, and you seem concerned about the source and that it's coming from Russia. So if this is just sort of your average sort of phishing expedition, what makes that more nefarious?
More nefarious is because as a soldier, before you go to battle, you prepare for battle. And if a foreign agency is going to go ahead and implement some sort of major attack, you have to know the infrastructure of what you're about to attack. And I will just tell you, a phishing expedition is just the start of a data analysis, a complex data analysis by a foreign entity. I know this because I've seen it before. And I can tell you right now that this is the start of people data mining and researching on where our vulnerabilities are in our system, and it's important to protect those. Now, just because of the fact these IP addresses came from the Netherlands and they're connected to the country of Russia, that should be even more alarming. Why is a foreign entity engaging in operations in our state? Not just our state, but also in Arizona. Our elections are for us. And if you want to go ahead and engage in our elections as a foreign entity, To me, that's a serious problem. And on the national level, our president and Congress have to address that. Part of the resolution, Senate Resolution 93 and Senate Resolution 94, encourages the U.S. Congress to start investigating these hacks into our election system. Because if they know how to operate through our system, not only at our state level, but through our municipalities, there's no telling what they can do. And to me, that's concerning because people back home should feel as if they're protected. Their vote is sacred. That's what makes our country great. And for me, as the chairman of the cybersecurity subcommittee, I'll do whatever I have to do to ensure that people feel secure in their voting process.
Local election authorities have been fairly vocal in the past about, every time the legislature adds, like I was saying earlier, an easier way to register to vote, is your call to have these local election authorities scrape their own processes? Is that not?
Yeah, and if they don't, go ahead. If you want to call it an unfunded mandate, you can call it whatever you want. But if they want to get hacked, go ahead and let them get hacked. And then when the voters go back and they say, why is my information compromised? You know what I'm going to tell them? It's your fault. I asked for you to go ahead and audit this system. I think that sometimes, people expect a reasonable expectation of privacy, and then all of a sudden their stuff gets hacked, and then, everything hits the fan. So if you want to complain about this being an unfunded mandate, then fine. But if you don't care about people's security and their personal information, I have a problem with that. And I'll go back and I'll write to every local elected official and I'll tell them. That's okay.
You said that you're going to write a letter and file resolutions, and you also mentioned Senate Bill 707 to mandate reporting of cyber attacks. Is there any other that you would want to see passed at the state level to deal with this problem?
Well, there's a lot of cyber or technology bills that I filed. One of the most hot button issues this legislative session, I joke and I don't joke at the same time, but I've created more jobs in Springfield than the governor has in his last 2 years in office. I filed the bill called 1502. It's the right to know. So if a company is selling and collecting your information and selling it to a third party, you should have the right to know who they're selling that to. And you should have the right to go to the Attorney General and ask her to file some sort of a lawsuit to stop that from happening. I've taken into consideration small businesses. I wanted to make sure that we don't stifle innovation or entrepreneurship in the state of Illinois. But I think people's information, their personal information, whether that be their social security number, to their sexual orientation, to whatever apps they use or whatever they use, that should be protected. And you have the right to know whether or not a company is putting profit over people. And I think you'll see that vote today. Oh, yeah. I'm excited. I hope so. It depends. I can tell you this much. We've been working really hard at this. And I'm excited about it because you go back home, we did a poll, statewide poll, 92% of the people, they feel as if their information is sacred. And if you want to vote no on that bill, well, then you're all about people selling your information to a third party. Go home and explain that to your sister who's on Facebook or whatever it is and shopping for whatever she shops for. I know that some of the stuff that you shop for, I know some of the stuff you Google, you don't want people to know about.
What's the opposition been like?
Like I said, I created more jobs in Springfield than the governor. So I think the good governor and, I hope he signs the bill. But if not, I'll remind him of it. Any other questions? I really, yes. So I just want to say thanks to you for at least covering this. It means a lot. Like I said, our democracy is sacred. And for me, it's very important to let people know back home that I actually care and that people down here care and that aren't all corrupt politicians. I think people down here really know that, they have a good interest and a good heart in making sure people feel protected. So,
any idea why your Republican colleagues on the subcommittee didn't?
I think because my questioning went on for 20 minutes and I could have asked any possible question imaginable, I did. And, but Senator Connolly and Senator Tracy's not even on the subcommittee. She showed up because it's of that much of interest. And, Senator Stottleman and Senator Cunningham's not on the subcommittee for cybersecurity. He showed up because it's important to him, too. I can tell you this much. People back home are watching this. People in the Senate are watching this. They want to know what happened. But after the election, all of a sudden, it fell off the grid because they're too busy worrying about Trump's first 100 days. I'm more worried about whether or not our election system's protected right now. That's a pretty big concern. And whether or not our next elections in 2020 and 2018, are they going to be protected? I hope so. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your time. Hi, Monique. How are you? You're very elegant today, Monique.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For years, the Board of Elections has complained they haven't had enough resources to do day-to-day operations, not to mention deal with something like this. I mean, what kind of answer lies in providing them more funding and more staffing given our current budget situation?
Why don't you tell the governor to go ahead and sit down with the respected leaders and act in good faith when negotiating a budget?
How about you?
I have. I think my views on the governor and this budget-making process are pretty clear. I think the questions that I ask them in the Appropriations Committee are very clear. And whether or not they want to answer those questions or not, that's up to them. But for some reason, they have a problem answering my questions. My questions aren't hard. People back home want to know, especially in my district where the south suburbs have seen the social services collapsing and our university having to reduce their programs by 22, or Interstate 80, otherwise known as Pothole Alley these days. Your budget impasse is really hurting people at home. So why don't you start leading instead of stop sitting around? So, anything else, Monique? I'll stay for you for as long as you want. Obviously so. Highest concentration of names. That was my concern. I'm like, Galesburg, that's interesting. But they're fishing and they're determining and they're going through our network structure and they're analyzing it. These people aren't dumb people. They're very, very complex people. And once you start analyzing a structure, you start finding other ways in. That's pretty serious.
You raise concerns that local election authorities may not have scrubbed their systems.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, does the state need to direct them to do that explicitly? There's kind of a gray area there and whether or not they did that in these conversations with the FBI.
I agree. That's why I said I was going to write a letter to our local electoral officials, and then we're going to go ahead and introduce a resolution to urge the State Board of Election to go ahead and urge these people to, like the nice lady behind you said, I apologize, I don't remember her name, but they're going to argue that it's an unfunded mandate. But again, it's that it cuts both ways. I'm going to urge you to do something. You have the choice to do it. But if your system gets hacked, am I responsible anymore? I've put you on notice. I've told you there's other ways to get into these systems. You need to protect them. You need to protect our people.